Alright guys, so this is part 2 of this PT Cruiser. This is going to be pretty much the fix. The owner has decided to replace all 4 injectors. He opted not to do the fuel injection cleaning. He also decided to replace the ignition coils, which is one assembly, which is it's a Blue Streak brand, part number UF403. I believe that he got this one from Pep Boys. The 4 injectors, he got the GP Sorensen brand. I believe that he bought this one from AutoZone, along with the valve cover gasket, which is the Velcro, part number VS50518R. And actually his plug wires were actually under warranty, under lifetime warranty, so he just got a new set of plug wires. So by him getting a new set of plug wires, we're going to be able to compare the resistance between the old to the new, and also compare the primary and secondary resistance from the new to the old, and compare and actually see if the resistance, especially on the primary, ohms out the same as the new unit here. So I'm thinking that this assembly of the ignition coils, I'm thinking it's still good, but the owner decided just to go ahead and replace it. So I'll do, whatever he wants me to do. But the one thing that I told him to keep, it was the spark plugs, since he said that the spark plugs were replaced 4 or 5 months ago. I told him that the spark plugs, to me, there's that they were still good. I just need a little bit of cleaning, but if they were to act up, that that I'll replace them for free. So he said that was fine then. So what I'm replacing so far for this vehicle, it's going to be the 4 injectors, the ignition coil assembly, the valve cover gaskets, and a brand new set of plug wires. The only difference I saw between the new to the old assembly of the ignition coils is that the old one, I'm pretty sure this is probably still the original, or maybe probably the aftermarket, I'm not sure. That this one has the numbers printed on the housing. For example, this one has, for ignition coil number 1, it has 1 and 4. For number 2, it has 2 and 3. But on this assembly, there's actually no numbers printed. So that's the only difference I saw between this brand of Blue Streak compared to maybe perhaps the original one. I'm not sure if this is original or not. So I guess the next step is to go ahead, do the valve cover gasket first, and at the same time, clean the spark plugs for 3 and 4, since those were the ones that were affected by contamination of oil. And then go ahead and do the injectors, then do the coil assembly, and then the plug wires. So once I'm done with all that, I'm gonna go back and do these resistance checks and compare the old to the new to see if those were actually within spec or not. And then I'm gonna also do the resistance checks on these injectors compared to the old ones, and then finally perform the injector drop test, compare our new injector drop test and to the old injector drop test. And hopefully my gut feeling, in which I said that these injectors are actually restricted or dirty, in which I'm actually biting the bullet by replacing them, I'm gonna confirm that my gut feeling is actually correct. So once I'm done with all this, I'm gonna show you guys all these test results again and compare them with the old. Alright guys, so I have already replaced the valve cover gasket. Also the spark plug tube seals. I've already installed the new coil pack assembly. I've also replaced the injectors, all 4 of them. That's number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you guys is the resistance. But I'm going to try to make this video short, this part 2. I'm going to just give you the resistance of one of the components. For example, on the plug wires, you know, I'm just going to ohm out one of the plug wires, and then I'll just do the rest. I'm going to write them down, and then I'm going to do the resistance of one of the coils. I'll do the primary and secondary, and then I'll do the rest. I'll write it down, and then I'm also going to ohm out at least one of the injectors, and then I'll do the rest, then go back at the end and compare our old to the new. Alright, so let me set up and then begin this process. Alright guys, so I'm here ohming out one of the plug wires. It's currently showing about 1.97 kilo ohms. So I'm going to do the rest and then write it down. So next thing I'm going to do is do the primary ignition coil resistance. Alright, so let me set up and then I'll show you. Alright guys, so I'm currently ohming out pins 2 and 3, which is primary resistance for ignition coil number 1. It's showing about 1.1 ohms. So I'm going to do number 2 and then I'll write it down. So the next thing I'm going to show you guys is the secondary resistance for ignition coil number 1. Alright guys, so I'm currently ohming out the secondary resistance for coil number 1. It's showing about 12.01. So I'm going to finish the rest for coil number 2 and write it down. Alright guys, so the next I guess the next step is for this resistance is going to be for the injectors now. So I'm going to set up and show you guys. Alright guys, so I'm currently ohming out the injector number 2. It's showing about 12 ohms. So I'm going to do the same process for all, you know, for the remaining 3. And then I'm going to go back and show you guys the results of everything I did with the resistance of ignition and also the resistance for the injectors. Alright guys, so I'm here I'll show you guys the results from the resistance I took for the ignition cables, the ignition coil primary and secondary resistance. So these resistance in this area here are the resistance of the new parts. So for the plug wires, for the first one that I took, it was about 1.97 kilo ohms. The second wire I ohmed out was about 1.95 kilo ohms. Number 3 was about 1.93 kilo ohms, and finally the fourth wire is about 1.92 kilo ohms. Now if we compare the new to the old ones were closer to 2 kilo ohms. The new ones are actually just below the 2K. So so that shows that my assumption was correct. Since these wires are less than 1 foot, the resistance are going to be less than what the spec shows, which is a minimum of 2.2 kilo ohms. So that means that our plug wires, the old ones, were within spec. That means that they were still good. But since the owner decided to replace them, and since these wires were under warranty, so he got them. Alright, so the plug wires from the old to the new were pretty much almost the same. Now the primary resistance for coil number 1, which is right here, it shows about 1.1 ohms. On coil number 2, it also shows about 1.1 ohms. Now if we compare it to the old, which is over here, it was showing about 0.9 to 1 ohm for both of them. So that means that our ignition coil primary was also within spec on the old coil assembly, but the customer decided to replace it. So I'm thinking that the specs that the manufacturer puts out, I'm not sure if they're the right ones or if it's a typo, but pretty much the old to the new, they're actually about the same resistance for the primary. So now the secondary resistance for the new component for coil number 1, it showed about 12.01 k ohm. Number 2, it also showed 12.01 k ohm as compared to the old. The old ones was about 12.42 kilo ohms. The number 2 showed about 12.41 k ohms. So that means that both resistances are within each other. The new one, of course, has just a little bit less resistance than the old one. So I'll say that pretty much all the components that were in the vehicle were actually within spec. So that's why doing a good comparison between the old to the new gives you an idea. So now I'm going to show you guys the resistance for the injectors. Let me just spin this around. Alright, so the resistance for the injectors, comparing the old to the new, which is here, the old, pretty much all 4 injectors were about 12.7 ohms. The new ones, pretty much 1, 2, and 4 gave me about 12 ohms. Number 3 gave me about 12.1. So the resistance is actually just a little bit less than the old resistance of the old injectors. The old injectors just had about 0.7 more of resistance. So that means the normal range between 10 to 16 actually does work out. Remember that the manufacturer did not provide that information for the resistance for the injectors, and I got that information from Google. For the normal range for fuel injections, about 10 to 16 ohms, which is good. Alright, so I guess the next step, guys, is to pretty much perform the injector flow test once again with the new injectors installed, and pretty much find out if the pressure drop is around the spec of 33 to 34. That's the spec that I got from that scanner Danner video that I saw from a Dodge Neon. So like I said, my gut feeling is that the old injectors were pretty much dirty or clogged, and to fix this problem is to pretty much replace these the injectors. So I'm gonna set up and then show you guys the injector balance test or flow test. Alright guys, so I'm ready to perform this injector flow test / drop test. I already have my equipment already set up. I got my scan tool. I'm gonna use my scan tool to prime the fuel pump. I got my OTC electronic fuel injector tester, and I got the fuel pressure gauge already set up. So I'm gonna prime the pump. I'm gonna turn it back off. So our rest pressure showing about 51, 52, 53, 54, about 55 psi. So I'm gonna hit the injector tester and just watch our gauge. So this one is actually showing about 40, 41, about 42 psi. I was expecting for it to drop actually between 33, 34. So for the first one, for injector number 1, shows about 42 psi. Alright, so for injector number 2, shows about 55 psi rest pressure. I'm going to hit the tester. On injector number 2, shows about 41. So for injector number 3, rest pressure shows about 55. I'm going to hit the tester. So for injector number 3, shows between 40 and 41. So I'll put down 40.5. So for injector number 4, rest pressure about 55 psi. I'm going to hit the tester. Number 4 shows about exactly 41. Alright, so I'm going to perform this test a second time with these new injectors. For some reason, the first test that we did, I wasn't really sure actually with the rest pressure. It seemed that at the time, it seemed that it was at 54, and then it would be at 55. Some will be at 54.5. Alright, so I'm going to do this a second time. I'm going to prime the fuel pump. On. Off. So rest pressure for this one, it's going to be exactly 54 psi. So I'm going to hit the tester. This is injector number 1. So for injector number 1, it's showing about 39. Alright, so this is injector number 2 with the rest pressure of 54. I'm going to hit the tester. This one's also showing about 39 psi. This is injector number 3 with the rest pressure of 55. I'm going to hit the button. This one's showing close to 40 psi. I'll say 39.5. This is injector number 4 with the rest pressure of 55. I'm going to hit the button. It's showing exactly 39 psi, number 4. Alright, so I'm here showing you guys the results of this injector balance flow test. I have the old to the new. On the left side, I have the specs for the old, and on the right side, it's the new injectors. As you can see here, in our first test, first injector dropped to 42 psi. Number 2 dropped to 41. Number 3 dropped to 40.5 psi. Number 4 about 41 psi. And on our second test, pretty much three injectors dropped to 39 psi, and then number 3 dropped to 39.5. So I'm thinking that 39 psi with the setting of 50 pulses at 10 milliseconds is the norm for this vehicle. So we started at rest pressure 55, and it dropped to 39, so that's a difference of 16 psi. So I'm thinking that a pressure drop of 16 psi is normal for these injectors. I really thought that the pressure drop was going to be a little bit lower, perhaps 33, 34, especially after watching the Scanner Danner's video in which he performed a injector balance test on that Dodge Neon. On his test, the pressure drop actually dropped to between 33 and 34. So, like I said, perhaps on this vehicle, on this PT Cruiser, the norm is 39 psi, which is a difference of 16 psi from rest pressure to pressure drop. I still feel that replacing the injectors was a fix, although the psi showed pretty much the same all around. But I'm thinking that on the old injectors, the problem was actually the spray pattern. The spray pattern on the injectors were not normal, which was affecting the that perhaps the fuel was not being optimized to its full potential, and was causing these lean mixtures during higher RPMs. Maybe the injectors were, I'll say, partially dirty, maybe, which was affecting the spray pattern. So I guess the next thing to pretty much confirm this fix is to look at the scan data and then look at the short-term and long-term fuel trims, and perhaps also do a road test to confirm this potential fix in which I replace the injectors. Alright guys, so that's the next step. Alright guys, so I guess our moment of truth, whether we fix this problem or not by replacing injectors, is by using our scan data once again. I'm going to select our parameters. Alright, I'm going to go back to live data. Alright, so far our short-term fuel trim is actually fluctuating between positive, negative. Long-term fuel trim is at 0.8%. Upstream O2 sensor is fluctuating between lean and rich, which is good. Downstream O2 sensor is at 0.7, 0.65. It's actually fluctuating. But the one thing I did note is that our long-term fuel trim at idle, it's showing at 0.8%. In our initial scan data that we did in our part 1, at idle was at 3.1. So long-term did drop. So I guess the next thing I'm going to do is raise the RPM and let's watch our long-term and short-term fuel trims. Here we go. At 1000 RPM it went to 7%, so it's acting the same way as before. 1500, 9.4, 2000. Still 9.4, which is a little bit close to 2100. It went up to 13.3, 2500, still at 13.3. Short term is trying to counter the long term. 3000. So long term dropped once again to 2.3. We're at 3100, so just close to 3100. Long term fuel trim drops to 2.3. So this still indicates that the memory is still stored in the computer. The best way to notice if we actually fixed it is to perhaps drive the vehicle for a while, and then look at your long-term fuel trim once again, or if you have a capable scan tool where you could actually reset the memory you could reset the memory and wipe the whole fuel trim cells and start from pretty much from zero again. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna go out of a generic mode, go into an enhanced mode, vehicle Pacific. (2006). Chrysler. This is the only downfall about this scan tool that you have to go through all these steps. Alright, so this is what the enhanced mode gives me. Options: read DTCs, clear DTCs, live data, live graph, actuators, and reset memory. Programming the ETC. So like I said, the way to wipe the whole long-term fuel trim memory cells is to actually hit the reset memory. So before I do that, I'm gonna clear the codes. Now I'm gonna go to the reset memory, and that should actually wipe So I'm gonna go to the fuel additives. It's gonna wipe the memory cells of the long-term fuel trim. Alright, so that should wipe it out. I'm gonna start the engine. I'm gonna go actually global, OBD2 now. Back to live data, select parameters. I'm gonna start the engine. Alright, so our long term, it went back to 0.0. So that's how you reset your memory on your fuel trims with the capable scan tool. Short term is fluctuating between negative and positive. Well, currently it's at negative. Now it jumped to positive. So I'm gonna redo the test again. I'm gonna increase the RPMs. So at 1500, since the memory cells are wiped out, long term is gonna relearn again. So 1500 shows about 3.1. 2000 about 4.7. Short term is in the positive range. Long term went back down. It's relearning the fuel cells again at certain RPMs range. So I'm gonna go back to 25. Short term is actually way positive. So 2500, we're at 3.1%. But if we add short term, long term, we're still over positive 10%. 3000. Short term went back to negative. But as you can see here now, that our long term is being stable at 3.1. So at 3000, we're still at 3.1. I'm gonna go 3500. Long term went to negative. So that's, so this is basically going to a relearn process of short-term, long-term fuel trims. Short-term gets his numbers from the long-term. So 35, we're negative 0.8. I'm gonna hit 4,000 real quick. So right now our long term is still 0.8. So as the vehicle gets driven, long term is gonna relearn. It's gonna actually get new memory cells. So far, just by resetting the memory cells on the fuel trims, our vehicle seems to be fixed by actually replacing the fuel injectors. So I'm gonna test drive the vehicle for a while, maybe for 10-15 minutes, and then come back and show you guys these parameters again. Alright guys, so I'm here doing a test drive on this vehicle. I've been driving this vehicle more than 1400 seconds, which is just a little bit above 20 minutes. I'm sorry for the shakiness, rough roads. So during this 20 minutes of test driving, I'm going to call this a fix. Short-term and long-term fuel trims look perfect. They're within that plus or minus 10%. As I increase the RPMs, the long-term is learning new memory cells, which goes through different RPM ranges. So this is during the decel right now. Long-term is at 4.7. So I'm coming to a complete stop. Long term went back to 0, which is good. So I'm going to confirm this a fix. During this 20 minutes driving, I'm not seeing no lean mixtures with our fuel trims. Short term is acting properly, positive and negative. Upstream O2 sensor is behaving normal too, fluctuating between rich and lean. So as I go through the RPM ranges, our fuel trims are normal, which is good. I feel more confident about replacing these injectors. For a moment I was kind of bummed out, especially during our injector balance test, that I was actually expecting a much lower drop test, anywhere from 33 to 34, but it was the same drop test of 39, which is a difference of 16 psi from 55 to 39. But so far during this 25 minutes, I really feel confident about this injector replacement, so I'm gonna call this a fix. Hopefully you guys enjoy this diagnosis. So this is Eli the OBD Tech. Subscribe if you like.